programme.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is an honour to be able to join into debate once again in this House. And if I could, Madam Speaker, this by what I'm hearing in the media and the rumours around Ottawa, we very well may be facing an election in the coming months. So, and as this may be my last speech prior to that election, I wanted to share just a couple of quick brief words of thanks to the constituents of Battle River Crowfoot for the honour that it has been over the last year and a half or so to be your voice in Canada's Parliament. And certainly as we have faced an unprecedented time on so many fronts and the need for collaboration, the need to hold the government to account as a member of the opposition, it has been a true honour. And I look forward to life getting back to normal. I know in Alberta, the Open for Summer plan has the vast majority of COVID restrictions being lifted on July 1st, and I know that is an exciting prospect for Albertans as we look forward to getting back to normal. And certainly, Madam Speaker, as I will, even though Parliament is scheduled to rise in a few days, I look forward to continuing to fight in every way possible for the good people of East Central Alberta in Battle River Crowfoot that I have the honour and privilege of being able to serve. Madam Speaker, I am here rising again on debate on the Liberals' budget, an omnibus budget bill, Bill C-30, that I would point out is something that the Liberals promised to never do. Now, when a Liberal parliamentary secretary was asked that very question on Friday, he said, well, this is different because it's a budget bill. And I would simply point out, as I've asked a number of questions on, and quite frankly have not received much response. This bill covers a wide swath of things, yes, that were promised in the much delayed budget that we saw introduced here a number of months ago. But it also includes some other aspects, including an amendment to the Elections Act, change to the gas tax fund, and a few other things that I will be diving into more detail on. But I would like to address one of the concerns that I'm increasingly hearing from constituents, and that is the attitude to which this current Liberal government is approaching the legislative agenda, approaching their way to govern the country. And I had a constituent that gave me a very apt description, Madam Speaker, that I'd like to share with you about the rhetoric that's been coming out of the Liberal benches as of late. And it is simply this: it's the government is quick to blame the opposition for all of their failures, which I think we've been very effective at articulating how absurd that is. And had it not been for the opposition, I would suggest that Canada would be in a much worse spot when it comes to whether it's COVID relief programs. The third time's the charm in terms of some of the legislation that's had to be repaired several times. The fact that it's the opposition that is exposing many of the areas of mismanagement and very, very troubling trends related to the approach that the Liberals have taken to government accountability and ethics, but Madam Speaker, these last couple of weeks in particular, the government House leader and other Liberal members, the Prime Minister in his press conferences, of course he would never say that in the House of Commons because he'd be held to account on it, but have said, well, it's the Conservatives that are being obstructionist, that it's somehow the opposition's fault that the government can't get anything accomplished. Well, Madam Speaker, a constituent shared with me an analogy that I would share with you, and it's simply this. That's a little bit like a student, after having received a syllabus for the school year, comes upon the night before the deadline for a major assignment or the end of the course, and all of a sudden realizes that they had a lot of work to do, but did very little or nothing. And now they have a choice. They can either admit their failures, or they can blame and pivot and make excuses. And Madam Speaker, certainly we see the government has chosen to do the latter, when they would rather blame Conservatives for obstruction than acknowledging that they're the ones in charge and have utterly failed in their legislative management. And Madam Speaker, if this is an indication of how they've managed government over the last 6 years, there is no wonder why our country is facing some of the major challenges they are. Madam Speaker, this is a large bill. Bill C-30 addresses many aspects of COVID response programs, changes to other aspects of the functioning of government, and I'm going to get into those specific things. But I do want to touch on a couple of things that haven't got a lot of airtime, so to speak. And one of which is that there is a proposed amendment to the Elections Act. Now, part of the Elections Act was that talks about misleading statements during an election, and was struck down by a court ruling. So the government has inserted, somewhat innocuously in this bill, a amendment to the Elections Act that would include the word knowingly mislead during an election. Now, I would suggest, Madam Speaker, that the government's the knowingly mislead part, there's a lot of discussion that should be had around that, especially when we see the failures of the current government to uphold elections commitments, pivoting away from promises made. Certainly the astounding level of mistrust that is being faced across across political discourse these days. And Madam Speaker, I find it troubling that hasn't been debated extensively in this bill, and it calls into question some of the purposes associated with why that would be inserted into the back of a Budget Implementation Act. The second thing, and this is something that is typically Liberal, I would suggest, and it is that in the Budget Implementation Act, the government plans to rename the gas tax fund. Now, this is the Liberal agenda at its best. They take something, rename it, shine it up a little bit of spit and polish, and then they would suggest that they have done Canadians a great service by this new program, a fancy new name, and that appears to be what they have done with the gas tax fund, which will be going forward called the Canada Community Building Fund. And certainly, their new name certainly has a ring to it that most Canadians would say, "Hey, that's a great idea." And grant applications and funds going to municipalities. But Madam Speaker, I believe it's very, very important to highlight that simply changing the name of something and some of the challenges associated with governmental accountability and the increased costs, and it is quite something to simply rename a program. And then what I expect is to come is that during what will be likely a flurry of election spending announcements promoted by the infrastructure of government, as we saw prior to the 2019 election, and of which we're already seeing how cabinet ministers are jet setting across the country to try and use the tools that they have at their disposal to make a myriad of promises prior to the election. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to see a whole bunch of promises related to this new fund, they'll call it. Now, they probably won't call it a new fund, but under a new name, and will certainly claim credit for the work, even though it certainly wasn't the Liberals that brought forward that fund, and how it has benefited many municipalities, including some in Battle River Crowfoot. So I'm glad to have had the opportunity to put that on the record so that Canadians know that simply renaming something does not give the government of the day credit. You know, Madam Speaker, it is. I see that my time is coming to a close. You know, there's extensions to the to many aspects of COVID programming. Some concerns related to not being able to address some of the folks that had fallen through the cracks. There's further changes to to health transfers, some of which is very needed. I would suggest that the dollar is a little bit too late when it comes to vaccinations, which speaks to the Liberal strategy. You know, if we had been on time with vaccines, we wouldn't have had a third wave. This was Justin Trudeau. My apologies, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's third wave when it comes to the delays that we face. But Madam Speaker, as we've come to, I believe, the end of my speech, I would simply say this. Parliament, as the institution that represents, the only institution that represents Canadians, to hear that the government is trying to circumvent at every cost the need for this place to carefully and thoughtfully debate and discuss legislation, including something as significant as this bill before us, Bill C-30. It is very troubling to hear that they would try to circumvent, dismiss the need for what should be of absolute importance to every single one of us. So, Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to questions.
Questions et commentaires à l'honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Like my colleague, I have taken the time to closely look over the budget, read and analyze it. And when I take notes, I use red ink when there's intrusion into Quebec and interference into Quebec and provincial jurisdiction. And there was a lot of red ink in my notes. I'd like to hear from my colleague on that aspect of the budget. The issue of federal intrusion into provincial jurisdiction.
For Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I think that this has become standard practice for successive Liberal governments is to ensure, whether it's through direct legislative means like we see in this, but also the whole myriad of other regulatory or political mechanisms that would blur the lines between the different levels of government. Madam Speaker, our federation works because there needs to be respect between different levels of government. And unfortunately, we have seen a significant erosion of that over the last 6 years, one that has led to a increased level of alienation in various regions of the country, certainly that is being felt in Western Canada. And a lot of that you point back to a Liberal government that refuses to stay within the lines of what our country was intended to be, how the Federation was intended to operate. And it is incredibly troubling that time and time again, we see that there is this intrusion into provincial jurisdiction by the federal government. The Ottawa knows best mentality. Now, that may make for great press conferences, great spending announcements, but Madam Speaker, that is not how leadership works. Leadership needs to be working with provincial partners. And
have to give times for other questions. The Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands.
I'd just like to ask the member to expand on his previous comment where he said that the federal government is going into jurisdiction that's provincial territory. The only thing that I can think of offhand would be the fight over pricing pollution, which the Supreme Court said was within the federal government's jurisdiction. So can the member elaborate on where the federal government seems to be going into territory that it shouldn't be?
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And to that member emphasizes the problem. He time and time again refuses to acknowledge that there are regions of the country that demand respect in our federation. And this Liberal government has refused to do so, even to the point where in various legislation, I think about Bill C-48, Bill C-69, even the debate around carbon pricing. Just because the federal government has the ability to impose their will on provinces, the question should be asked is whether or not they should. And the problem is we have a Liberal government that is currently in charge that refuses to respect anyone who disagrees with any aspect of the way that they would approach politics, the legislation that they would
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his comments. Now, we know that with Bill C-30, with this budget, during the pandemic, inequalities have increased. The ultra-rich are becoming richer than ever, and those who need help are still struggling to get by. And yet, we don't see a wealth tax. We do not see a pandemic profiteering tax. And in fact, the government has opted to do more consultation in tackling the problem of tax havens. Does the member think that this is the right approach, or does he think the NDP's proposal in bringing forward a wealth tax and actually bringing forward a profiteering tax during this time is the right way to go?
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I think that the member asks a question that strikes at the heart of the way that the Liberals have pulled the wool over the eyes of Canadians. They're trying to outflank the NDP on the left regarding policy measures, but when it comes to actual implementation, to dealing with many of the things that they promised to deal with, they end up simply saying that, well, we'll consult on that going forward, or back off back away from their commitments entirely. And Madam Speaker, I think that is further a troubling trend that we see, that there is a government that is not being honest with Canadians. And I would simply say this: a lot of the COVID programming, we have seen increasingly that it is the elites that are benefiting from the billions of dollars that was meant to